A millionaire CEO who had everything, yet believed love was an illusion. His world was perfectly ordered until he made one mistake, hiring a messy but genuine assistant who challenged his every rule. She didn't just reorganize schedule, but also his empty heart. Oh, before their relationship gets even more complicated, hit follow and drop a comment. Let me know where you're listening from, will you? The rain hammered down on Manhattan's streets, turning them into a shimmering mess of puddles and chaos. Mia George stood at the curb, one hand gripping her umbrella, the other waving desperately for a taxi. Her black pencil skirt and white blouse, ironed to perfection that morning, were starting to wilt under the downpour. At 26, Mia was a bundle of nerves and grit, chasing a job at Terrycore that could lift her out of the financial pit she'd been stuck in since her parents' business collapsed. Her resume folder was tucked tightly against her chest, her mind racing through practiced answers. Then, from the shadow of an awning, Justin Terry emerged, 33, CEO of Terrycore, all sharp lines and tailored confidence. His dark suit repelled the rain like it knew better than to touch him. He strode toward the cab Mia had just flagged, phone glued to his ear, voice clipped as he discussed a deal worth millions. To Justin, the world bent to his will. The rain was just a nuisance, and people were pieces on his chessboard. Deep down, though, a hollow ache gnawed at him, a loneliness he buried under boardroom victories and fleeting flings. Mia's voice sliced through the storm. "Hey, that's my cab!" But Justin didn't break stride, sliding into the back seat with the ease of someone who always got his way. The door clicked shut. Mia banged on the window, her temper flaring. "Seriously? You're stealing my ride in this monsoon? What kind of jerk does that?" Inside, Justin lowered his phone, meeting her furious gaze through the glass. Her auburn hair was plastered to her face, but her eyes burned with defiance. "Learn to share, sweetheart," he said coolly, though her spark caught him off guard, a fleeting jolt in his otherwise ordered day. He waved the driver on, dismissing her. Mia wasn't done. "Oh, real classy, suit. Hope your fancy tie keeps you warm when karma bites you." She stepped back, her heel catching in a storm drain's grate. A sharp snap echoed as the heel broke, nearly toppling her. She cursed under her breath, yanking her foot free. "Perfect, just perfect. Steal my cab and murder my shoes, why don't you?" She glared at the cab's taillights, then, with a huff, tossed her broken heel into her bag. "Bet you've never run barefoot in your life, you smug taxi thief." The other shoe came off, too. She wasn't about to limp lopsided to the biggest interview of her life. Barefoot, the cold pavement stung her feet, but Mia squared her shoulders. "Fine, rich boy," she muttered. "I'll get there, and I'll make you eat that smug grin." She took off, dodging puddles and pedestrians, her resolve hardening with every step. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It was personal. In the cab, Justin's lips twitched, her words echoing in his mind. "Smug taxi thief?" he murmured, almost amused. Her fire was different. Annoying, sure, but oddly compelling. He shook it off, returning to his emails. His penthouse loomed in his future, sleek, silent, empty. Work was his anchor, but her voice lingered, a tiny crack in his perfect world. Mia reached Terrycorp's gleaming lobby, soaked and barefoot, her heart pounding but unbroken. Wiping rain from her face, she stepped into the elevator, her mind blazing. That guy, whoever he was, had no idea what he'd unleashed. She wasn't just fighting for a job now. She was fighting to prove she could rise above anything, even a broken heel and a stolen cab. The elevator doors slid open, and Mia George stepped into the pristine, glass-walled conference room of Terrycorp, her bare feet silent against the polished marble floor. Her blouse clung damply to her skin, and her auburn hair, still wet from the rain, hung in messy tendrils. Yet she carried herself with a quiet defiance, her resume folder gripped like a lifeline. This was it, the interview that could change everything. She was the last of 30 candidates, and the air in the room felt heavy with judgment. Eliana Wise, the sharp-eyed financial manager, sat at the head of the table, her manicured nails tapping impatiently. Her gaze flicked over Mia's disheveled appearance, a smirk curling her lips as if she'd already written Mia off. Beside her, Justin Terry lounged in his chair, his tailored suit pristine, his expression unreadable. The moment his eyes landed on Mia, a flicker of recognition passed through them. The barefoot girl from the taxi incident, now standing before him, undeterred. Mia squared her shoulders, ignoring the cold seeping into her feet. She'd run across Manhattan, dodged puddles, and swallowed her pride to get here. No one, not the rain, not a broken heel, not even the smug CEO who'd stolen her cab, was going to stop her. The panel fired questions, rapid and relentless, probing her experience, her skills, her nerve. The other candidates had delivered polished, rehearsed answers, each one blending into the next like corporate wallpaper. Mia, though, was different. Her responses were raw, sharp, and unfiltered, cutting through the room's sterile atmosphere. When Eliana asked about her greatest weakness, Mia's gaze locked onto Justin, her voice steady but laced with fire. "I don't handle injustice well, no matter how small. It's not just a flaw. It's why I fight harder than most."
Justin's brow twitched, the faintest crack in his cool facade. He knew exactly why she was barefoot, why her clothes were damp. Her words landed like a challenge, and for a moment, he saw not just a candidate but a force, someone who refused to bend. The room grew quiet, the other interviewers exchanging glances, but Justin's mind was elsewhere. He was used to control, to people who deferred to his every word. Mia, though, was chaos in the best way, a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. Against all logic, he leaned forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "You're hired. My personal assistant. Start tomorrow." The words hung in the air, stunning everyone, including Mia. Eliana's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of irritation. Mia's heart stuttered, not from joy, but from the weight of the decision. She needed this job. The bills piling up on her kitchen counter didn't leave room for pride. But working for him? The man who'd left her stranded in the rain? Every fiber of her wanted to refuse, to tell him exactly where he could shove his offer. Yet the reality of her empty bank account pressed harder than her anger. She swallowed, her jaw tight, and gave a curt nod. "Fine. I'll be here." As the room emptied, Justin watched her gather her things, her movements brisk but deliberate. There was something about her, maybe the way she'd stood her ground, barefoot and soaked, or the way her eyes held a spark that didn't flicker even now. He told himself it was a practical choice. He needed someone who could handle his chaotic schedule, someone who wouldn't crumble under pressure. But deep down, a quieter thought stirred. She intrigued him, and that was dangerous. Mia stepped back into the elevator, her mind spinning. She was in, officially part of Justin Terry's world, a place of glass towers and power games she barely understood. But she wasn't here to play nice or fade into the background.
She'd prove her worth not just to him, but to herself. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection in the steel, disheveled, determined, and ready for whatever came next. That taxi thief had no idea what he'd just let into his life. Mia's first day at Terry Corp dawned bright and unforgiving, the kind of morning that demanded perfection from everyone in the glass tower. She arrived early, her practical flats a far cry from yesterday's ruined heels, carrying a small potted cactus she'd picked up on a whim from a corner store. Justin's office was a stark expanse of chrome and white walls, more like a showroom than a workspace, cold, efficient, and utterly devoid of warmth. It mirrored him perfectly, she thought, as she set the cactus on his desk, right next to his sleek computer. "There," she murmured to herself, stepping back to admire it. "Even prickly things need a little company." It was her quiet rebellion, a touch of life in his sterile world, because if she was going to survive here, she'd do it on her terms. Justin strode in moments later, his suit impeccable, his mind already buzzing with the day's agenda. A merger call at 9, investor lunch at noon, and a stack of reports that could bury a lesser man. He froze at the sight of the cactus, its spiny arms reaching out like an unwelcome guest. "What is that?" he asked. His tone clipped, though a flicker of confusion softened the edge. Mia, organizing his overflowing inbox with ruthless efficiency, didn't miss a beat. She'd already rearranged his calendar, color-coding meetings and slashing redundancies that had him double-booked for hours. "It's a cactus," she said simply. "Your office looked lonely, like it needed something that could survive on neglect." He stared at her, the words hanging between them like a challenge. Justin wasn't used to this. Assistants who talked back, who reshaped his space without permission. His previous ones had been shadows, efficient but invisible, fading into the background. Mia, though, was a whirlwind, her presence filling the room with an energy he couldn't ignore. He opened his mouth to protest, but his phone buzzed, a reminder for a call he'd nearly forgotten, now neatly slotted in thanks to her tweaks. Instead of snapping, he sat down, the cactus staring back at him like a silent judge. Deep inside, a tiny spark of curiosity ignited. Her boldness was irritating, yes, but it cut through the monotony of his days. As the morning wore on, the clashes piled up like stacked files. Justin dictated a memo, expecting her to transcribe it verbatim, but Mia paused, her pen hovering. She suggested a rephrase, sharper, more direct, stripping away the corporate fluff that diluted his points. "It'll land better this way," she explained, her voice calm but firm. He bristled, his control slipping. Who was she to edit him? Yet, when he read it back, it was better, crisper, more him. He grunted approval, but inside, a grudging respect took root. She wasn't just following orders. She was thinking ahead, anticipating needs he hadn't voiced. Lunchtime brought another skirmish. Justin's schedule had him grabbing a quick sandwich at his desk, but Mia had blocked out 30 minutes, insisting on a real break. "You'll burn out otherwise," she said, handing him a coffee she'd brewed just right. Strong, no sugar, the way she'd noticed he liked it from his half-empty mugs. He waved her off, diving into emails, but she lingered, her eyes steady. Even machines need downtime. It was a small push, but it hit home. His days blurred into nights, the penthouse waiting empty as ever. For the first time in months, he stepped away, if only for 15 minutes. The office quieter without her bustling energy. By afternoon, Justin found himself glancing her way more often. Her organized chaos, files sorted by priority, not alphabet. Sticky notes with witty reminders like, "Don't forget to breathe between conquests," was upending his rigid system. He tried to rein it in, barking in order to revert a change, but she countered with logic that left him speechless. Her efficiency wasn't mechanical. It was intuitive, almost alive. And in a quiet moment, as she handed him a report with a small, satisfied smile, he felt his own lips curve upward. A real smile, not the polished one for boardrooms. It startled him, this warmth creeping in, like sunlight through cracks in his armor. Mia, for her part, felt the pull too, the tension of working so closely with him, seeing glimpses beyond the cold exterior. He was demanding, sure, but there was a vulnerability in his exhaustion, a loneliness that echoed her own struggles. She pushed back not to defy, but to prove she belonged, that her ideas mattered. As the day ended, she packed up, the cactus still standing sentinel on his desk. This wasn't just a job. It was a battlefield, and strangely, she was starting to enjoy the fight. The week had settled into a rhythm at Terry Corp, a dance of sharp banter and subtle challenges between Mia and Justin. His office, once a fortress of cold efficiency, now bore traces of her presence. Sticky notes with cheeky reminders, the stubborn cactus still perched on his desk. But the air shifted on Friday evening when the company hosted a high-stakes client dinner at an upscale rooftop restaurant overlooking the city's glittering skyline. Mia, tasked with ensuring everything ran smoothly, moved through the event with her usual precision, her black dress simple but elegant, her auburn hair swept into a loose bun. Justin, in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the candlelight, worked the room with practiced charm, sealing handshakes and promises of profit. Yet his eyes kept drifting to Mia, catching her quick smile as she deflected a waiter's mix-up with ease. Trouble arrived in the form of Eliana Wise, the financial manager whose icy demeanor could freeze the room. She glided in, her red dress clinging to her like a second skin, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Eliana had been circling Justin's orbit for years, her ambitions as clear as her disdain for anyone who threatened her influence. Tonight, she zeroed in on Mia, her gaze raking over her with the precision of a predator sizing up prey. As Mia adjusted the seating chart to accommodate a last-minute VIP, Eliana leaned in close, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Careful, darling. Assistants don't last long when they overstep. Stick to fetching coffee." The words were a jab, meant to sting, but Mia's smile didn't falter. She straightened, handing Eliana a glass of champagne with a look that said she wasn't intimidated, though inside, her pulse quickened. This wasn't just a snide remark, it was a warning. The evening took a turn when a junior executive, emboldened by too much wine, decided to make a scene. He cornered Mia near the dessert table, his voice loud and slurring as he questioned her presence. "What's a glorified secretary doing at a client dinner? Shouldn't you be taking notes somewhere?" The room quieted, heads turning, the tension thick enough to choke on. Mia's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground, her mind racing for a comeback that wouldn't cost her the job. Before she could speak, Justin appeared, his presence commanding the space like a storm rolling in. He stepped between them, his voice low but laced with steel. "She's here because I trust her to keep this night from falling apart, unlike some who can't handle their liquor." The executive shrank back, mumbling an apology, and the crowd dispersed, but the moment lingered, charged with something new. Mia caught Justin's eye as he turned to her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen, almost protective. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just them, the city lights blurring, the chatter fading. He handed her a napkin, a small gesture, but his fingers brushed hers, lingering a second too long. "You okay?" he asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of its usual edge. She nodded, her throat tight, surprised by the warmth in his concern. It wasn't part of their deal, this unexpected kindness, and it stirred something in her, a flicker of trust she hadn't planned on. Later, as the guests mingled, Mia found herself alone on the balcony, catching her breath. The city sprawled below, a tapestry of light and shadow, and she let herself feel the weight of the night. She'd held her own, but Eliana's words echoed, a reminder of how precarious her place was in this world. Justin joined her, his tie slightly loosened, a rare crack in his polished armor. He didn't say much, just stood beside her, the silence comfortable in a way neither expected. "You handled that well back there," he said finally, his voice low, almost like he was testing the words. "Most wouldn't." Mia glanced at him, seeing not the CEO, but a man who, for once, seemed genuine. Something shifted between them, a fragile connection taking root, like the first green shoot in barren soil. As they returned to the dinner, the night felt different, less like a battlefield, more like a shared space. Eliana watched from across the room, her smile tight, her suspicions sharpening. Mia felt the weight of her stare but pushed it aside, emboldened by the moment she and Justin had just shared. For the first time, she sensed he might see her, not as an assistant but as an equal, and that, she realized, was a dangerous thought, one that could change everything. The next day, the private jet hummed softly as it cut through the clouds, bound for Chicago, where Justin Terry was set to close a critical deal with a tech startup eager to join Terry Corp's empire. The cabin was a cocoon of luxury, leather seats, dim lighting, and the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Mia sat across from Justin, her tablet balanced on her lap, her fingers tapping as she finalized his presentation slides. Her navy blazer and sensible flats were a stark contrast to the opulence around her, but her focus was unwavering. Every detail of the trip planned to perfection. She'd been at Terry Corp for 2 weeks now, and their dynamic had settled into a tense, electric rhythm, her sharp wit clashing with his cool control, yet somehow making the workflow smoother than ever. Justin, in a tailored navy suit, leaned back with a glass of scotch, his eyes scanning a contract but drifting to Mia more often than he'd admit. Her presence was like a pebble in his shoe, small, persistent, impossible to ignore. She'd turned his office upside down with her color-coded schedules and that ridiculous cactus. But the results were undeniable. Meetings ran on time, reports were sharper, and he felt oddly steadier with her around. Still, he kept his distance, wary of the warmth she stirred in him, a feeling he hadn't allowed in years. The trip, though, threw them into closer quarters than either expected. A mix-up at the hotel, a double-booked suite, left them sharing a sprawling penthouse with 2 bedrooms but a single shared living space. Mia unpacked her bag with brisk efficiency, claiming the smaller room without complaint, while Justin stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline sprawling below like a chessboard he intended to conquer. But the suite felt too intimate, the air charged with their unspoken friction. Mia, unfazed, set up a makeshift office on the dining table, her papers and laptop arranged with the precision of a general plotting a campaign. "We've got 3 hours before the dinner meeting," she said, her voice steady but with a teasing edge. "Don't expect me to iron your tie." The day was a whirlwind of meetings, each one a high-stakes dance of negotiation. Mia was at Justin's side, her notes meticulous, her insights whispered in his ear when a client's question caught him off guard. Her quick thinking saved a faltering pitch, her calm delivery smoothing over a tense moment with a skeptical investor. Justin noticed how the room shifted when she spoke, not because she demanded attention, but because her words carried weight, grounded in a clarity he envied. At the dinner, a sleek affair in a candlelit steakhouse, she navigated the small talk with ease, disarming a prickly CEO with a well-timed joke about Chicago's wind. Justin watched her, his usual detachment slipping, replaced by a quiet admiration that unsettled him. Then came the evening's hiccup, a spilled glass of red wine, courtesy of a clumsy waiter, that drenched Mia's blazer just as the group moved to a private lounge. She excused herself, her smile tight, and retreated to the restroom. Alone, she dabbed at the stain, her frustration bubbling, not at the wine, but at the constant need to prove herself in this world of polished suits and sharp elbows. When she returned, Justin was waiting, his own jacket draped over his arm. Without a word, he handed it to her, the fabric warm from his body, the scent of cedar and scotch clinging to it. "Take it," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "You're not walking in there looking like a wine casualty." She hesitated, then slipped it on, the oversized sleeve swallowing her frame but grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. Back in the suite that night, they shared a quiet moment over takeout coffee, the city lights casting shadows across the room. Mia kicked off her shoes, her guard down for the first time, and Justin loosened his tie, his usual armor softening. They didn't talk about work. Instead, a stray comment about Chicago's deep-dish pizza sparked a playful debate, her laughter light and unguarded, his rare chuckle surprising them both. For a moment, the space between them felt less like a battlefield and more like a bridge, fragile but real. Neither spoke of it, but as they parted for their rooms, the air held a new weight, a connection neither was ready to name, but both felt growing. The Chicago trip had left an unspoken shift in the air between Mia and Justin, like a melody just starting to hum. Back in New York, Terry Corp's offices buzzed with the usual frenetic energy. But something quieter was brewing. It was late, the skyscraper nearly empty, the city lights casting long shadows through the glass walls. Mia was at her desk, sorting through a stack of contracts, her hair slipping from its bun, a pencil tucked behind her ear. Justin lingered nearby, ostensibly reviewing a report, but his attention kept drifting to her. The way her brow furrowed in focus, the soft clink of her coffee mug as she set it down. Their shared moments in Chicago, from the borrowed jacket to the pizza debate, had cracked something open, and neither could quite ignore it. The office was silent save for the hum of the air conditioning, when a sudden power flicker plunged them into darkness. The city skyline glowed outside, but inside, the shadows swallowed everything. Mia fumbled for her phone, its flashlight casting a soft beam, when she bumped into Justin, who'd moved to check the breaker panel. Their collision was clumsy, her hand brushing his chest, his catching her elbow to steady her. For a moment, they froze, the air thick with the scent of her lavender shampoo and his cedar cologne. Neither moved, and then, without warning, Justin leaned in, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was equal parts impulse and inevitability. It was brief but electric, warm and searching, like a question neither had dared to ask. When they pulled back, Mia's breath caught, her eyes wide in the dim light, while Justin's face held a rare vulnerability, as if he'd surprised himself as much as her. The lights flickered back on, harsh and unforgiving, snapping them back to reality. Mia stepped back, her fingers touching her lips, her mind racing. She wanted to be angry, to call it a mistake, but the warmth lingering in her chest told a different story. Justin cleared his throat, muttering something about checking the panel, but his usual composure was frayed, his tie askew. The moment hung between them, unspoken, as they returned to their tasks, the silence now charged with something new, something dangerous. But the kiss wasn't the only thing stirring. Earlier that day, Mia had received an anonymous email, a cryptic message hinting at a secret tied to her past. It mentioned her parents' failed business, a loan from Terry Corp that had crushed them, and a name, Ileana Wise. The words had hit Mia like a punch, unearthing memories of her family's ruin, the years of scraping by, the shame she'd buried. She'd kept it hidden, even from herself, but now it clawed its way up, whispering questions. Was Ileana involved? Did Justin know? The email hinted at files locked away in Terry Corp's archives, and Mia's resolve hardened. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was a woman with a purpose, even if it meant digging into a truth that could unravel everything. As she packed up to leave, her gaze lingered on Justin, who was staring out at the city, his jaw tight. The kiss had shifted something, but so had that email. Mia felt the weight of both, her heart pulling her toward him, her mind warning her to tread carefully. She slipped out, her footsteps soft but determined, the city's pulse echoing her own. Whatever came next, she'd face it head on, but the stakes had just gotten higher. The boardroom at Terry Corp was a fortress of glass and steel, high above the city, where deals were forged and fates decided under the glare of fluorescent lights. The air was thick with tension, the long mahogany table lined with stern faces. Board members in tailored suits, their expressions a mix of skepticism and impatience. Justin stood at the head, his voice steady as he presented his vision for the next quarter, charts flickering on the screen behind him. He'd fought for this moment, defending his role as CEO against whispers of doubt from his father, who sat silently in the corner, his eyes sharp as knives. Mia was there too, off to the side, her notebook open, her role as assistant masking the deeper bond that had grown between them. She felt the weight of the room, her heart pounding, the anonymous email's hints about her family's past still gnawing at her like an old wound. Everything shifted when the door swung open with a dramatic creak. Eliana Wise strode in, her heels clicking like accusations, a folder clutched in her manicured hands. Her red lips curved into a triumphant smile, her eyes locking on Justin with the precision of a hunter. The board murmured, shifting in their seats as she placed the folder on the table and began her assault. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice smooth but laced with venom, "before we proceed, there's something you need to know about our CEO's judgment." She flipped open the folder, scattering printed emails and photos. Grainy shots of Mia and Justin in Chicago. A borrowed jacket. A shared laugh. Twisted into evidence of impropriety. This assistant isn't just organizing schedules. She's entangled in a personal relationship that clouds his decisions. The room grew colder, whispers rippling like a wave. Eliana pressed on, her words slicing deeper. She revealed fragments of Mia's history, the small family bakery her parents had run, the loan from Terry Corp that had come with impossible terms, leading to bankruptcy and heartbreak. "Mia George isn't here by chance," Eliana declared, her gaze flicking to Mia. "Her family was ruined by our company's aggressive expansion years ago. And now, she's wormed her way in, perhaps as revenge, perhaps as a spy. Justin knew, or should have known, and he chose to ignore it for personal reasons." The board erupted in hushed conversations, eyes darting between Justin and Mia, judgment heavy in their stares. One member leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "This is a liability. How can we trust leadership that's compromised?" Justin's face paled, his fists clenching at his sides. He'd built his world on control, on deals and distance, but this hit like a gut punch. The photos, the accusations, they twisted innocent moments into scandals. Worse, the truth about Mia's past slammed into him. He hadn't known. But now it explained the fire in her eyes, the way she pushed back. His mind reeled. Had their connection been built on a lie? He tried to speak, his voice cracking slightly. "This is out of context. Eliana's twisting facts to—" But the damage was done. The board's trust frayed, his father's disappointed shake of the head like a silent verdict. Mia stood frozen, her world tilting. The room's eyes bored into her, stripping away the armor she'd built. Memories flooded back, the day her parents closed the bakery, the empty dinner table, the shame that had driven her to this job. She hadn't come for revenge, not consciously, but the email had planted doubts, and now Eliana had weaponized them. Her cheeks burned, her hands trembling as she gripped her notebook. Part of her wanted to run, to escape the humiliation, but another part, the resilient core that had carried her through barefoot interviews and stolen cabs, held her in place. She met Justin's gaze across the room, seeing the betrayal flicker in his eyes, and her heart twisted. This wasn't just about her past. It was shattering the fragile trust they'd built. Eliana stepped back, her smile widening, satisfied with the chaos she'd unleashed. The board demanded answers, voices rising, the room a storm of accusations. Justin struggled to regain footing, his empire cracking under the weight of personal truths exposed. Mia felt exposed, raw, like every scar from her past was on display. As the meeting dissolved into disorder, she wondered if anything could be salvaged, or if this reveal had broken them beyond repair. The boardroom fallout left a heavy silence in its wake, the kind that clung to the walls of Justin's office like damp fog. The city outside sparkled, indifferent to the storm that had just torn through Terry Corporation. Justin stood behind his desk, the cactus Mia had placed there earlier now a mocking reminder of her presence. Papers were strewn across the polished surface, his tie loosened, his usual polish replaced by a raw edge of exhaustion. Mia stood across from him, her arms crossed, her face a mask of resolve despite the tremor in her hands. The air between them crackled, not with the electric tension of their Chicago nights, but with something sharper. Pain, betrayal, and the weight of truths laid bare. Eliana's revelations had cut deep, exposing Mia's past and twisting their connection into a scandal. The board's whispers, the grainy photos, the accusations of revenge, it had all landed like a wrecking ball. Mia felt stripped bare, her family's ruin dragged into the open, her intentions questioned. She hadn't come to Terry Corp seeking vengeance, but the email, the loan, the collapse of her parents' bakery, it all painted a picture she couldn't fully deny. Worse was the look in Justin's eyes, a mix of hurt and confusion that made her chest ache. She'd seen glimpses of his warmth, his vulnerability, but now those moments felt like a fragile illusion, shattered by the boardroom's cold light. Justin paced, his footsteps muffled on the carpet, his mind racing to salvage something. His position, his trust in her, anything. He wanted to believe Mia wasn't playing him, that their late-night talks and that stolen kiss meant as much to her as they had to him. But doubt gnawed at him, fueled by Eliana's calculated strike and his father's silent judgment. He stopped, facing her, his voice rough with emotion. "Did you know about the loan? About my company's role in your family's mess?" His question hung heavy, pleading for an answer that could pull them back from the edge. Mia's jaw tightened, her eyes glistening but unyielding. She'd spent years burying that pain, building a life on sheer grit, only to have it weaponized. "I didn't come here to hurt you," she said, her voice steady but soft, like she was holding herself together by threads. "But I can't stay in a place that sees me as a threat, not a person." She reached into her bag, pulling out a single sheet of paper, her resignation letter, written in neat, deliberate strokes, and placed it on his desk. The act felt final, like closing a door she'd only just begun to open. Justin stared at the letter, his heart sinking. He wanted to argue, to ask her to stay, to say something that could bridge the chasm between them. "Mia, don't," he managed, his voice cracking, raw with a desperation he hadn't felt in years. But she shook her head, stepping back, her expression a mix of sorrow and resolve. This wasn't about anger or blame, it was about survival. She couldn't stay in a world that tore her open, not when every glance from the board, from Eliana, branded her as an outsider. As Mia turned to leave, the office felt emptier, the city's glow colder through the windows. Justin stood frozen, the resignation letter a stark white wound on his desk. He thought of their moments, the cactus, the jacket, the laughter over pizza, and realized how much he'd come to rely on her, not just as an assistant, but as someone who saw him, not the CEO. Mia walked to the elevator, her steps heavy, each one carrying her further from him, from the life she'd fought to build here. The doors closed with a soft ding, and she leaned against the wall, her breath shaky, her heart torn between what she felt for him and the truth that had driven her away. The city hummed below, oblivious, as two worlds pulled apart, leaving only silence and the sting of what might have been. The penthouse atop the city was a kingdom of glass and shadow, its vast rooms echoing with a silence that pressed in like an unwelcome guest. Justin Terry wandered through it that night, the resignation letter from Mia burning a hole in his pocket, though he'd left it on his desk at the office. The lights of Manhattan twinkled below, a million lives pulsing with energy he suddenly envied. He poured himself a scotch, the amber liquid swirling in the crystal glass, but it tasted like ash. The place was impeccable, marble counters, sleek furniture, art pieces chosen by a decorator he barely remembered, but it felt hollow, like a shell he'd outgrown. He sank into the leather couch, the same one where he'd reviewed deals until dawn, alone as always. Tonight, though, the solitude clawed at him, sharper than before. Memories of Mia flooded in unbidden, the way she'd rearranged his calendar with that determined glint in her eye, the cactus she'd planted on his desk as if daring him to let a little life in. He thought of the kiss in the darkened office, brief and electric, and the warmth of her laughter over pizza in Chicago. Had it all been a facade? The boardroom revelations replayed in his mind. Her family's bakery crushed under Terry Corp's expansion, a loan twisted into ruin by terms he hadn't overseen but now owned as his legacy. Guilt twisted in his gut, not just for the past, but for how he'd let Eliana's poison seep in, questioning Mia's intentions when she'd given him nothing but honesty. He'd built an empire on control, on keeping people at arm's length, but what good was power if it left him staring at empty walls? For the first time, he saw the emptiness clearly. No family photos, no lingering sense of home-cooked meals, just the cold hum of the city. Mia had cracked that open, shown him glimpses of something real. And now she was gone, taking that spark with her. He stood, pacing to the window, his reflection staring back, a man who had everything but felt like nothing. His father's voice echoed in his head. The old man's lessons on ruthless ambition, on sacrificing personal ties for the top. Justin had followed that path, becoming the CEO who commanded rooms but couldn't hold on to a single genuine connection. The scotch glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor, the sound jolting him. He didn't clean it up. Instead, he sat on the edge of his bed, head in hands, the weight of regret settling like a stone. Sleep evaded him, the night stretching into a long vigil where he confronted the man he'd become, isolated, driven, but utterly alone. By dawn, a quiet resolve took root. This couldn't be his life. Mia had shown him there was more, and losing her had made it painfully clear. Morning light filtered through the blinds as Justin dressed, his movements deliberate, the tie knotted with a firmness that matched his decision. He drove to his father's office, a corner suite in the old family building, walls lined with trophies of past conquests. His father sat behind a massive oak desk, silver hair impeccable, eyes appraising as Justin entered without knocking. The air smelled of aged leather and cigar smoke, a reminder of countless lectures on legacy and sacrifice. Justin didn't sit. He stood tall, his voice steady but laced with a new edge. "I'm done following your playbook," he said, the words hanging in the quiet room. He spoke of the boardroom disaster, of Mia's past tied to their company's aggressive moves, but more than that, of the emptiness it had bred in him. "You built this empire alone, and it left you with nothing but echoes. I won't end up like that. Mia showed me what matters. Real connections, not just power plays." His father leaned back, his expression unchanging, but Justin saw the flicker, a hint of surprise, perhaps even regret. He didn't wait for approval. He turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him like a chapter closing. Outside, the city buzzed with fresh energy, and for the first time, Justin felt a shift deep within, not just remorse, but a commitment to change. Power without heart was meaningless. Mia had taught him that, and now he'd prove it, even if it meant risking everything he'd built. The boardroom felt smaller this time, the air thicker with anticipation as Justin called an emergency meeting the morning after his confrontation with his father. The same stern faces gathered around the mahogany table, murmurs rippling like undercurrents. Eliana, perched at the edge with her smug smile barely concealed. Justin stood at the head, his suit crisp, but his eyes shadowed from a sleepless night, the weight of his decisions etched into his posture.
He didn't pace or fidget. He planted himself firmly, the cactus from his desk now a distant memory of what he'd lost. This wasn't about defense or excuses. It was about action, the kind that stripped away his armor and laid his choices bare. He began without preamble, his voice even but carrying a new gravity that silenced the room. He acknowledged the revelations, the photos, the whispers of scandal. But he turned the focus to Mia, not as a liability, but as a strength. He spoke of her contributions, the way she'd streamlined operations, caught errors that could have cost millions, brought a human touch to a machine of a company.
"She's not a weakness," he said, his gaze sweeping the board. "She's proof that we've lost sight of what matters. People over profits. Integrity over image." The words hung there, a direct challenge to the cutthroat culture his father had instilled, and he saw the shifts. A few nods, some narrowed eyes, Eliana's smile faltering just a touch. But Justin knew words alone wouldn't mend what was broken. He'd spent the dawn hours crunching numbers, reviewing reports, piecing together a plan that risked everything. With a steady hand, he projected a new slide, bold figures outlining a radical growth strategy. "I'm betting it all," he announced, his tone unyielding. He committed to boosting the company's profits by 20% over the previous year, a number that drew gasps, whispers of impossibility echoing off the glass walls. It meant aggressive expansions, innovative partnerships, and cost cuts that spared no sacred cows, including his own perks and pet projects. In exchange, he demanded full autonomy on personnel decisions, no interference from the board, no vetoes on hires or fires. It was a gamble that put his career, his reputation, on the line. Failure would mean his ouster, the end of his reign at Terry Corp. The room erupted in debate, voices clashing like thunder. Some called it reckless, others visionary. Eliana leaned forward, her objections sharp, painting him as blinded by personal ties. But Justin held firm, countering with data, projections that showed the path forward if they trusted him. Deep down, this wasn't just business. It was redemption. By defending Mia publicly, by staking his future on a bold pivot, he was choosing her dignity, her impact, over the safe, solitary power he'd clung to. He thought of her resignation letter, the way she'd walked away not in defeat, but in quiet strength, and it fueled him. This bet was his way of proving he'd changed, that he valued her not as an assistant or a fleeting spark, but as the catalyst who'd awakened him to a fuller life. As the meeting dragged on, Justin felt the shift, the board's skepticism cracking under the weight of his conviction. One by one, they voted, the eyes tipping the scale in his favor, though narrowly. Eliana's face tightened, her influence waning in the face of his resolve. He left the room with a nod, no triumph in his step, just a quiet determination. Outside, the city bustled, unaware of the personal stakes he'd just wagered. This gamble wasn't about winning back control. It was about earning back trust, starting with his own. Mia might never know, but in risking it all, Justin had finally stepped out of his father's shadow, toward a future where love and legacy could coexist. The board's decision landed like a quiet thunderclap, the votes tipping in Justin's favor after hours of heated back and forth. The room exhaled, papers shuffling as members filed out, leaving Justin alone with the echo of his bold promise. 20% growth or his head on the block. He didn't celebrate. Instead, he felt a steady calm settle in. The first real purpose he'd chased beyond boardroom wins. Eliana slipped away with a tight smile, her eyes flashing warning. But Justin's mind was already elsewhere, on Mia, the one person who could turn this gamble into gold. He left the tower that afternoon, the city streets alive with the rush of people heading home, and drove to her modest apartment, the kind of place with creaky stairs and a buzzer that stuck. No limo, no entourage, just him, hat in hand, ready to ask for help as a man, not a CEO. Mia opened the door in jeans and a faded sweater, her auburn hair loose, surprise flickering across her face before her guard snapped up. The apartment behind her was cozy, books stacked on a coffee table, a half-eaten sandwich on the counter, signs of a life piecing itself back together after the boardroom storm. She hadn't expected him, not after the resignation, the hurt words, the way she'd walked away to protect them both. Justin stood there, his usual suit rumpled from the day, and spoke simply, no grand gestures. He laid out the bet he'd made, the autonomy he'd won, but admitted he couldn't do it alone. "I need you back," he said, his voice low, stripped of command. "Not as an assistant, as a strategic advisor. Your ideas, your grit, that's what'll make this work." Mia hesitated, her arms crossed, memories of the betrayal stinging fresh. But she saw the change in him, the humility in his eyes, the way he stood without looming. It touched something deep, that quiet respect, and, after a long pause, she nodded, stepping aside to let him in. They weren't fixing the past in that moment, but starting something new, as partners. Days blurred into weeks as they dove in together, the office transformed into a war room of whiteboards and late-night takeout. Mia took her role seriously, her insights sharp as ever, suggesting pivots in marketing, cuts in wasteful spending, partnerships with smaller firms that aligned with real values. Justin listened, really listened, deferring to her calls without ego, their collaboration a seamless flow that surprised even them. Laughter crept back in during quiet moments, a shared eye roll over a stubborn spreadsheet, a quick coffee run turning into a brainstorm. But beneath the work, trust rebuilt, slowly, like mending a favorite quilt, stitch by stitch. One evening, poring over financials, Mia spotted anomalies, subtle transfers, padded expenses that didn't add up. They dug deeper, cross-referencing old reports, and the pattern emerged. Eliana had been siphoning funds, small at first, then bolder, funneling money into shell accounts tied to her name. It was clever, hidden in layers of corporate fog, but together, they unraveled it, the evidence stacking like a house of cards ready to topple. The final confrontation came in another board meeting, the room charged with the same tension as before, but now Justin and Mia stood side by side, a united front. He presented the growth updates first, early wins showing promise, then pivoted to the real bombshell. Mia laid out the evidence calmly, slides clicking through discrepancies, bank trails, emails that sealed the deal. The board leaned in, murmurs turning to outrage as the full scope hit. Millions embezzled, trust violated at the core. Eliana's face drained of color, her protest thin and frantic, but the proof was ironclad. Security escorted her out, her heels echoing down the hall for the last time, her empire crumbling to audits, lawsuits, and the kind of ruin that left no safety net. The board erupted in questions, but Justin fielded them with Mia at his side, her quiet strength anchoring him. As the meeting wrapped, the air felt lighter, justice served not with vengeance but with steady truth. Mia glanced at Justin, a small smile shared. The alliance they'd forged not just saving the company but proving what partnership could truly mean. The office was quiet, the chaos of the boardroom victory settling into a gentle calm as dusk painted the Manhattan skyline in hues of gold and purple. Justin and Mia stayed behind, the familiar space now softened by the absence of tension, papers neatly stacked, the cactus on his desk catching the last rays of sunlight. Eliana's downfall had cleared the air, the truth about her embezzlement sealing her fate and restoring a fragile balance to Terry Corp. The board's trust in Justin was reaffirmed, his bold gamble showing early signs of paying off. But tonight wasn't about numbers or power. It was about the two of them, standing in the same room where it all began, where a stolen taxi and a barefoot interview had sparked something neither could have predicted. Mia leaned against the desk, her arms loosely crossed, her sweater soft against her frame. A far cry from the polished assistant who'd first walked in. She felt lighter, the weight of her family's past no longer a shadow but a story she'd reclaimed. Working with Justin these past weeks had been a revelation, not just of his commitment to change but of their partnership, a dance of trust built on late nights and shared victories. Yet there was an ache, a question lingering in the quiet moments, about what they were to each other now. Justin stood by the window, his tie gone, shirt sleeves rolled up, the city's glow framing him in a way that made him seem less like a CEO and more like a man searching for words. He turned to her, his eyes steady but carrying a softness that hadn't been there before. The journey from that first clash on a rainy street to this moment had stripped away his armor, leaving him open, vulnerable in a way he'd never allowed himself to be. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking, the air warm with the scent of coffee and the faint cedar of his cologne. He didn't reach for grand gestures or polished speeches. Instead, he spoke from a place deep within, his voice low, almost hesitant, like he was testing the weight of his own heart. "You've changed me, Mia," he said, the words simple but heavy. "Not just the company, but me. Who I am, who I want to be. You make me better, not because I need you to fix me, but because you showed me what's worth fighting for." Mia's breath caught, her eyes locking with his. She saw the man who'd defended her, who'd risked his empire to stand by her, who'd listened when she spoke, and trusted her when it mattered most. The hurt from the boardroom, the sting of betrayal, had faded in the face of his actions. Not just the grand gamble, but the quiet moments, the way he'd handed her his jacket in Chicago, the way he'd laughed at her pizza quips. She'd spent so long fighting to prove herself, to stand alone, that letting someone in felt like a leap. But with Justin, it wasn't about losing herself, it was about finding a partner who saw her strength and matched it. She stepped forward, closing the gap, her hand brushing his arm, a small gesture that felt monumental. The silence stretched, not heavy, but alive, like the moment before a first note in a song. She didn't need him to complete her, but she wanted him. His flaws, his growth, his quiet humor that had crept into their days. "You're not the guy who stole my taxi anymore," she said, a faint smile curving her lips. "And I'm not running away this time." They stood there, the city humming below, the world outside fading as they leaned into each other, not with the fire of that first kiss, but with a steady warmth, a promise of something real and equal. It was forgiveness, not just for him, but for the past they'd both carried, and a beginning built on trust, earned through every step they'd taken together. 2 years later, the late afternoon sun spilled over a quiet Brooklyn street, where a small crowd gathered outside a cozy storefront, its windows adorned with pastel bunting and the warm scent of vanilla wafting through the air. Mia's Bakery, Sunrise Sweets, stood proud, its sign gleaming with her name in elegant script, a dream born from years of grit, now a reality. Inside, the counters overflowed with lemon tarts, chocolate croissants, and her signature cinnamon rolls, each one a nod to the recipes her parents had taught her in their old family kitchen. The space was alive with chatter, customers sampling treats, their laughter mingling with the soft jazz playing in the background. Mia moved through the crowd, her apron dusted with flour, her smile brighter than the sun outside. She'd built this place from the ground up, not with loans or shortcuts, but with hard-won savings and a vision that refused to fade. Justin was there too, No longer the polished CEO who'd stolen her taxi on a rainy day. His suit jacket hung casually over a chair, his sleeves rolled up as he helped pass out cupcakes to eager kids, his laughter deep and unguarded. The man who'd once lived for boardrooms and power plays now looked at home here, among mismatched tables and the clink of coffee mugs. Their wedding bands glinted in the light, simple and silver, a quiet testament to the life they'd forged together. Marriage hadn't erased their edges. Mia still teased him about his terrible taste in pizza, and he still grumbled when she left sticky notes on his laptop. But it had woven their strengths into something stronger, a partnership that balanced her fire with his steadiness. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a small affair, but it felt monumental. Friends, neighbors, and a few Terry Corp colleagues clapped as Mia snipped the ribbon, her eyes shining with pride. She'd insisted on doing this herself, not as Justin's wife or Terry Corp's advisor, but as Mia George, the woman who'd walked barefoot into an interview and refused to back down. Justin stood beside her, his hand brushing hers, a silent anchor in the moment. He'd stepped back from the CEO role months ago, passing the reins to a trusted successor, choosing instead to mentor startups and support Mia's venture. The empire he'd once chased no longer defined him. He'd found meaning in the smaller things, their morning coffee runs, the way she hummed while baking, the life they were building. As the crowd thinned, they stole a moment by the counter, the bakery quieting around them. A child ran past, clutching a cookie, and Mia chuckled, her hair catching the golden light. Justin watched her, his heart full in a way he hadn't known was possible. The years since that stormy day had been a journey of trust rebuilt, wounds healed, and a love that grew not from grand gestures, but from countless shared moments. They weren't perfect. They argued over schedules and forgot whose turn it was to do dishes. But they faced it all together, equals in every way. The bakery's warmth wrapped around them, the smell of fresh bread grounding the moment. A reminder of the home they'd created, not just here, but in each other. Outside, the street glowed with evening's first stars, the city alive, but no longer daunting. Mia leaned into Justin, his arms slipping around her, and they stood in the doorway, watching the world go by. This was their victory, not just a business or a marriage, but a life built on courage, forgiveness, and the kind of love that weathered storms. The bakery's sign swayed gently in the breeze, a beacon of their shared dream, and for the first time, they both felt truly at peace, ready for whatever came next.